Well, Pete, it's now October and the nights really are drawing in and probably getting rather cold. Let's start at the VP as ever. We're looking at the inner solar system, the planet Mercury. So Mercury's in the morning sky at the start of October, rising about 70 minutes before the sun. Not that bright at magnitude 1.4.
No, but it does improve, doesn't it?
It does, and markedly improve, actually. And by the 8th of October, it's magnitude minus zero point 0.2 when it comes to greatest western elongation. So that's the furthest it can be from the sun in this elongation, rising about 100 minutes before sunrise. So good chance to see Mercury in the morning sky.
Yeah, and it actually stays in a good position and is fairly bright right way through to about the 20th of October when it's shining about magnitude minus zero point 0.9 and rising 80 minutes before the sun. After that date, though, even though it remains bright, its rising offset from the sun reduces. And on the 24th of October, mag minus 1.0 Mercury, preceded by a nearby 1% lit waning crescent moon, that should be worth looking out for, rises about an hour before the sun. But by the end of the month, shining at mag minus 1.1, the rise time offset is about 30 minutes, which is probably too small.
Yeah, it's going to be a bit, that'd be very tricky. Next planet out, Venus. Well, interesting things are happening with Venus. So at the start of the month, it rises about 40 minutes before the sun. Very brilliant, magnitude minus 3.8. But it is becoming hard to see. And in fact, the planet reaches superior conjunction on the 22nd. And that means the sun lies almost directly between the Earth and Venus. And after that date, it's reached superior conjunction, Venus will then appear back in the evening sky and start its new eastern elongation. And this is actually going to be a very good one for UK observers. So it's worth following Venus from this point on, and it will get progressively better and higher in our evening skies and become a very, very good target.
Yes, that's right. And you sort of have this periodicity with Venus, don't you? It's every couple of years or so, 2-3 years, I think it is, that it actually gets into a good position in the evening sky. So the next one after this won't be so good. So this is something to celebrate, really, because, well, unless you're an early riser and you've been getting up to look at Venus, which I guess you have.
No, it doesn't matter that it's in the morning sky, because I can look at it at 9 o'clock in the morning and find it.
Oh, you do it during the day, don't
I
you?
always observe Venus during the day, so it doesn't matter.
Which is a wise thing to do, but you need to know what you're doing.
You do. You
run a risk.
You do. You get blinded if you're not careful. But I know how to use my setting circles, so it's not a risk. But yeah, absolutely, don't do it. Well, you know how to do it as well. It's not just me.
Yes, I do. Okay, well, let's move out to Mars then, which is noticeably getting brighter and much better in the sky at the moment. In fact, it's getting a reasonable size as well. So Mars is probably best seen at the end of the month, say about 3 o'clock in the morning, universal time. And it'll then be reaching an altitude due south of about 61 degrees, which really is something to celebrate, isn't it?
It is. That's really quite high in the sky. It's probably that's the most any planet has been in the northern sky for a very, very long time. So
apart from Uranus.
I did say brightest planet. Uranus is a wonderful world. I'm not detracted from it, but it's been a very long time since we've had a bright naked eye planet that high in the sky. It'll be quite striking to see. And I've made a start on Mars. My 8-inch telescope, because I couldn't get it with a 12-inch initially because it was in a different part of the sky. But even with an 8-inch telescope, about 8 arc seconds, you could make out the polar cap and some of the dark surface features. So really now's the time to be starting on Mars. I've written an article on it in the Sky at Night magazine. There you go. There's a shameless plug there, Pete, that explains what to look for in the coming months up to opposition. So now's a good time to start on Mars if you haven't already done so.
Well, yes, at the beginning of the month, Mars will present an apparent disk size about 11 arc seconds across, and that will grow in size, and at the end of October it'll be about 15 arc seconds across, which is pretty good.
Yeah, it is, and that's a very, very reasonable size, and even a small telescope will show you something. But with Mars, I don't know about imaging, but certainly visually because it's gone for so long, you kind of fall out of the habit of observing it.
Oh,
so
absolutely.
You have to learn how to look at it all over again every single time it appears. This is why I start early, because if you can see details on a 7-8 arc second disk, by the time it gets really large, you should have no problems pulling out the fine details. But it is a marathon, not a sprint with Mars, and you do need to put the effort into going out and having a look at it.
It's a very difficult planet to observe, actually, because your first impression when you see it through the eyepiece, you've probably seen lots of pictures which people have taken of the planet, and you've read a lot about it, and you've had magazine articles which are telling you what you're going to see, and you look through the eyepiece and all you see is a pink blob. And there's nothing there, and it's because you're not used to it.
That's
and you
right.
have to give yourself time and your eye to sort of get into the Mars groove to actually be able to see anything at all. And it's also very hard in terms of, I was going to say getting excited about it. That's the wrong thing to say, but it does test your patience a bit because of its rotation period.
Yeah.
Basically, if you observe it at the same time every night, the next night you go to observe it, it's sort of rotated back a little bit. So you get a little tiny new bit of Mars, and then it replays what you saw the night before.
It does.
And then the next night you get the same effect. And you think, when's it ever going to change?
It takes about 3 weeks to see the whole surface from any one particular place. It is unfortunate. I have had it happen to me where I've had cloudy periods in between nights. And as a result, you can end up looking at the same face of Mars for about a month if you're really unfortunate. But not very often, but it can be some trial of patience. It can.
It's unkindly described as the boring face because it's sort of mainly desert, isn't it? Where it hasn't got a lot of dark albedo features, exposed rock features.
Yeah, it's the Amazonia desert region, Cydonia and a bit of Tharsis all along there. It's actually not so bad when the planet has quite a southerly tilt, because there is some interesting things up near the southern polar region. There are dark markings on there. But when Mars is presented equatorially onto us, or with its northern hemisphere tilted, which will kind of be how it will be in October, you're right, all those interesting features are not visible. You just have vast ochre deserts with nothing in them, except the occasional high morning cloud, if you're lucky. So, but let's not do Mars down, Pete.
Oh, no, absolutely not. No, there is a seriousness to this because it's preparing people for the Mars marathon, basically.
Yes.
And, if you think you're going to look through the eyepiece and you're going to see something that's going to wow you and you're going to believe there used to be people living on Mars or whatever, that's not going to happen. It's just you have to put in a lot of effort. You have to really sort of put the time in on Mars to get the best out of it.
Yeah, and that's a good thing, though, because the more effort we put into the hobby, the more rewarding it is, in my opinion.
That's absolutely correct. Okay, what about Jupiter then? Jupiter it was at opposition last month, so Jupiter's in a really good place at the moment. And actually, there's been a lot more activity in terms of observing and imaging Jupiter from the UK recently, because it's now climbing higher in the sky for us, and that makes a big difference.
It is. I'll tell you what, though. I was looking at some of my observing logbooks from Jupiter from about 2010. And it's remarkable just how different the planet looks now. We've had these slow changes where the equatorial zone has become darker and more activity. There's been slowly more and more increase in the belt south of the main equatorial band to the south. So much so now the planet is actually very, very crowded and full of detail.
Yes.
It looks really quite different from 5 or 6 years ago. It's quite amazing.
And the Great Red Spot is fairly smallish now, isn't it?
It is quite small, yeah. I mean, if you look back at Voyager images or Pioneer images of when Pioneer 10 and 11, they preceded Voyager out into Jupiter and Saturn. The Great Red Spot is incredibly large, whereas now it's quite tricky. You do need fairly good seeing and probably at least a 6-inch aperture to see it convincingly now.
Yeah. Well, on the 1st of October, Jupiter shines at magnitude -2.8. That's pretty bright for Jupiter. And this is going to be a consequence of the planet coming towards perihelion, which is early next year when it's closest in its orbit to the sun. So it's getting an extra boost in brightness, I think, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And it's amazing that because in cosmological terms, it's not that much closer, but it is in kind of solar system terms and in terms of brightness, it has made a little bit of a difference.
Yes, it has.
All right, well, next planet out, Saturn. And Saturn is an evening planet, well placed for observing. We're now well past opposition for Saturn. So if you look on the following side of the rings, you should be able to see the shadow of the globe on the rings. That's obviously normally even quite small telescopes.
Yeah.
Shining at magnitude plus 0.6, so not brilliant, but still quite noticeable on the 1st of October. And this dims down to magnitude 0.8 by the end of the month, but it reaches its highest position due south under dark sky conditions all month, so it's worth observing, really.
Yes, it is.
And some interesting details as well. Although the features on Saturn are much more muted, they're definitely there, and it's worth seeing if you can see them or image them.
Yeah. Well, we mentioned Uranus earlier. Uranus remains extremely well placed for UK viewing. It's appearing over 50 degrees up when due south at the moment. So that's worth looking out for. And it is worth finding Uranus if you're not sure where it is as well, because there's another lunar occultation of the planet. So we had the one in September, but there's another one coming up in December. So if you didn't see the one in September, then locate Uranus and get ready for the December event.
Yeah, and apart from this being an interesting event of itself, if you have real trouble sky hopping or star hopping to Uranus or using your setting circles and haven't got go-to, then this is a great way. There's no better way of finding Uranus than just before it's occulted by the moon.
No.
The moon is such an obvious target that, you find that very easily and just look for Uranus nearby off the limb of the moon.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Neptune was at opposition in the middle of September and remains very well placed for observation from the UK. At the end of the month, shining away at magnitude plus 7.8, you'll need at least binoculars to see Neptune. And in fact, if you've got a big telescope and look at it, you're not going to see a great deal of detail on the planet. But you will see it as a disk, so it's worth looking out for. And you might even be able to see its largest moon, Triton, which shines at magnitude plus 13.5 and is surprisingly easy to see, actually. If you have an 8-inch telescope, you should be able to pick up Triton fairly well. At the moment, Neptune is quite close to Jupiter, and at the end of the month, they'll be separated by just under 7 degrees. So that's a reason to try and hunt down Neptune if you've been looking at Jupiter. Anyway, let's move on now to some of the specials which are happening in October. And we begin right at the very beginning of the month with the clair-obscur effects known as the lunar X and V, which are visible early evening, reaching their peak just before 7 p.m. BST. You've seen those? Yeah,
most of the time I've seen them has been by chance, actually, but they are quite striking, so you don't really have to hunt them down. They do become quite obvious. On the 9th of October, you get a chance to see Ganymede emerging from being eclipsed by Jupiter's shadow, and this occurs in the morning at 01:54 BST or 00:54 UT. The moon's disk takes around 10 minutes to fully emerge from the Jovian shadow to the east of the planet. This is actually a good one to watch for because it just shows how large Ganymede really is.
It does.
It's larger than the planet Mercury. And, to take 10 minutes to emerge from Jupiter's shadow, that's going to be worth photographing. It's also going to be worth, if you've got a good big telescope, looking and seeing how the shadow changes as it emerges from Jupiter's shadow. I'm going to try and get a series of drawings for that if it's clear.
Well, if you've got a large telescope or high-resolution imaging set up, it is worth looking out for because as Ganymede comes out from the shadow, as the shadow sort of unveils the moon, you can actually see the disk of Ganymede and you can see the shape of the shadow as it's crossing the moon, which is quite incredible. I've animated that in the past, so that's definitely well worth looking out for.
And I have never seen it, so I'm quite excited about that one.
Oh, right, okay. Well, on the 16th, there's another event you'll probably get excited about, which is a well-placed opportunity to see the giant moon Ganymede again occulted by Jupiter's disk. That occurs at 01:03 BST in the morning of the 16th. Jupiter sets before Ganymede re-emerges from Jupiter's shadow to the east of the planet on this one. So on the 9th, you'll see it emerging from the Jupiter's shadow, but on the 16th, you see it disappearing behind Jupiter itself.
That'll be quite good. It's always nice to see these large satellites occulted, because Ganymede and Callisto, it takes them so long to go around Jupiter, unlike Io, Europa. These kinds of events, trying to catch them visible from the UK when it's dark and Jupiter's above the horizon, they're actually fairly rare. So we've got some good events for Jupiter this month.
Yes, we have. Okay, well, on the 19th, if you grab a telescope view of Jupiter just after sunset, it should be possible to see Europa, Europa's shadow, and Ganymede's shadow in transit. Ganymede appears off the planet's southwest limb at this time. Europa exits transit at 1940 BST, Ganymede's shadow at 2010 BST.
On the 21st, we have the Orionid meteor shower. This is predicted to reach its peak at around 1900 BST, meaning tonight and into tomorrow morning will be the best viewing window to see the shower. Moon is in the late waning crescent phase, so it's rising in the morning and unlikely to interfere with the view too much. So
now the Orionids are quite nice, aren't they?
They are quite a nice shower to watch out for. We've got a all sky cam that we've got for capturing meteors and fireballs. So naturally, it malfunctioned during the Perseids, so I'm hoping that it will be fine for the Orionids and we'll catch some meteors. We did capture some late Perseids, so it wasn't a complete washout, and I'm hoping that we'll capture some nice Orionid meteors on the 21st, 22nd.
It's obviously something that happened because I had a camera fail for the Perseids, which is unusual actually, but it did, and these things do occur, and they're sent to test us. Okay, on the 24th, there's an excellent opportunity to spot a very thin waning crescent moon in the morning. Look low above the east-southeast horizon from 7 a.m. BST for magnitude minus 1.0 Mercury with a 2% lit moon 4.1 degrees above it. If you've never seen a really thin moon, this is a good opportunity, actually. They can be quite impressive.
They can, and it's interesting the amount of detail that may or may not be on the crescent, depending on libration. So they're kind of different each time. No two thin crescent moons appear exactly the same.
Now, the waning crescent moon is an odd thing, isn't it? Because it's got the large flat areas like the Oceanus Procellarum, which sort of cover a vast part of the moon's side on that side. And it looks sort of like someone scraped off all the detail on the waning crescent moon, whereas on the waxing crescent moon, there's loads of detail.
There is. It's definitely a striking effect. In fact, the waning phases of the moon are quite interesting because all the shadows and things you're used to seeing are all at different angles.
Yes.
When the evening terminates close by. And it's always interesting to look at the moon in that phase because you're not usually up and about looking at the moon when it's like that. So it's worth a look.
Okay, well, on the 25th, talking of moons, it's a different moon. A view of Jupiter at 0046 BST will show the moon Callisto very close to the planet's southern pole. And our moon gets involved again on the 25th because we've got a partial solar eclipse, which can be seen from the UK between 10 o'clock BST and 12 o'clock BST. Those times encapsulate the whole event. The eclipse magnitude is greatest from the northeast of the UK. From the centre of the UK, first contact is about 7 minutes past 10 BST, with the sun 16 degrees up. Greatest eclipse is at 10:58 BST when it's 20 degrees up, and last contact at 11:50 BST when it's 23 degrees up. Northeast Scotland gets the best view, magnitude 35%. That means that 35% of the sun's diameter is crossed by the moon's disk, whereas the southwest of England will get the worst view with only 17% covered. And that'll be a nice event if it's clear.
It will be, and it will be nice to get a series of images or drawings showing the passage of the lunar disk across the solar face. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Hopefully it will be clear and not wet and windy as it normally is in October. On the 26th, Galilean moon jackpot this evening because we've got Ganymede starting transit at 18:15 BST, Europa then joins in the act at 1925 BST, and then Io is occulted at 2003 BST. Europa's shadow is in transit from 2053, and then finally Ganymede's shadow is in transit from 2118. That's a lot of moon activity.
A lot of moon activity. So the 26th of October is your moon activity date. And it's good time, actually, starting early evening. Watch it through, not through to too late. So that's very good. On the 30th, a big cheers coming here. The UK's period of daylight savings comes to an end. And at 2 o'clock BST in the morning, the clocks will revert back to 1 o'clock UT. Interestingly, as the clocks reverse direction, you see what I did here, Mars reverses direction in the sky and is now showing retrograde. That was good, wasn't it, actually?
It was.
That was almost professional.
It was almost professional. I should point out that Pete hasn't arranged this. It's just a quirk of circumstances, and putting clocks back does not affect planetary motion in any way. I thought I'd better put that in as a spoiler.
No, Mars only goes retrograde when the clocks go back. No, it's not true. Okay, well, let's now move on to the October sky. And there's a blend of 3 seasons available at this time of year. We've still got the summer. We've got the summer triangle, which never, ever seems to go away.
Always got the summer triangle. It's more prominent in summer. But yes, that's Vega, Deneb, and Altair still visible. Although Altair is actually starting to lose altitude quite rapidly now as winter approaches.
Oh, it'll be around for ages yet. I think it's still visible, Altair, in December.
Probably is.
Just call it the triangle. That would be easier.
Just call it the triangle. If you look east, the stars of winter, though, are starting to climb higher. One of the things you notice in sort of September, October is the Pleiades open cluster.
Oh, yes.
Once you start to see that in the late evening sky, then you know winter isn't too far away. So the Pleiades open cluster is actually quite high up in the latter part of the night during October. If you point a pair of binoculars at them, or indeed the finder scope of your telescope, you will be astounded by the view. It really is hundreds of stars on show.
Yeah, they're lovely.
It's no good looking through a telescope. You do need the wide field, low power view.
Or a low power telescope, but you're quite right. Normally, if you look through a telescope eyepiece, you're just looking straight through the cluster, so you don't really see very much. And to the south of the Pleiades, you'll find orange Aldebaran, which is surrounded by the V-shaped Hyades open cluster, which is even more spread out than the Pleiades. But they're still a wonderful sight. They're great with the naked eye, actually. And it's always an anchor, a visual anchor, when you see Aldebaran, you see the V of the Hyades. That brings me great pleasure to see them in the sky.
Easily pleased, aren't you, Pete?
Yes.
All right. Well, summer and winter are connected by something quite pretty and particularly if you've got a darker sky, a ribbon of faint starlight, which we call the Milky Way. And this is just one of the spiral arms of the Milky Way that we see looking out into the galaxy from our position. Now, if you look over to the west again, you'll see it flowing up through the cruciform shape of Cygnus the Swan. Looks like a cross. Also known as the Northern Cross, and the Milky Way runs through the entire spine of the cross, eventually leaving Cygnus north of Deneb and entering the nearby constellation of Cepheus the King. And if you've got a fairly dark sky, that really is quite a sight to behold.
It is. Cepheus is an interesting constellation because it looks like a child's drawing of a house. But in the basement, or the beginning of the basement, there's a very interesting star called Mu Cephei, which is also Herschel's Garnet star. It's one of the largest stars that can be seen. It's a red supergiant, about 1,420 times larger than our sun, and about 350,000 times as luminous. So if you place Mu Cephei where the sun is today, quite how you'd move it, I don't know. But if you could do that, its outer boundary would lie between the orbits of Jupiter and Saturn.
That's big.
That is big, yes.
Big star. It's a very big star.
It's a variable as well. Have you ever observed it as a variable?
I haven't observed it as a variable. I have a slight bias with red giants. I always end up... Because the problem with red giants when you observe them for variable star observation is they're so shockingly obvious in the field of view, you're naturally drawn towards them. So I have to be very careful with red when they're at their brightest, because you can end up over over observing them, overestimating the magnitude because they look so brilliant in the eyepiece. But there are ways of doing that. It's slightly defocus the eyepiece, and then they don't look quite so brilliant. But it's not on one of my list of stars that I observe for variable star purposes.
Okay.
But I do take a look at it now and then when it's at its brightest, because it really is a beautiful deep red colour, and it looks very striking.
So we'll put you down as a picky variable star observer.
Picky, I prefer the term selective myself, actually. Selective.
Okay, well, let's go from Cepheus and the Milky Way flowing out of that sort of child's drawing of a house, and he flows into King Cepheus's wife's constellation, actually, which is marked by Cassiopeia, the seated queen, both royals occupying the area of sky close to the zenith at this time of year. So it's a good time to scan them, actually, for deep sky objects, especially Cassiopeia, because it's really rich in deep sky objects, particularly open clusters. There's some great ones there. And from Cassiopeia, the Milky Way flows down into Perseus, the Greek hero. And between both constellations, of course, you've got that wonderful pair of clusters known as the double cluster, which is H and Chi Persei. I think binoculars are give you the best view of this pair, don't they?
Yeah, again, or finder scope, or a very, very low power telescope. I shall give my description again because I'm so proud of it. It looks like somebody spilt a load of sugar on a black velvet cushion.
I'm sure it was me that gave that description.
No,
and
it wasn't. That's not you. You stop trying to pilfer my few little inspirations that I have left.
That's true. That's true. There are only a couple left now. Okay, well, as we go below Perseus, the Milky Way flows through Auriga, the charioteer. And Auriga it's an interesting constellation. It's easy to find because it's got the bright star Capella at the top of what you can best describe as a distorted pentagon shape.
Yes.
It's an interesting constellation because in charts it's always joined to Taurus, because the star at the bottom of, well, it would be a hexagon actually if it was joined to Taurus, would be which is now Elnath, which is Beta Tauri. I think it used to be Gamma Aurigi.
Long time ago, yes, yeah.
Long time ago, in the mists of time. But there are some great clusters there as well. You've got the lovely Messier trio, M36, 37 and 38. So they're well worth looking out for.
Yes, they are. And with this journey, you've passed from the summer skies into the winters. And so, not surprisingly, the stage in between must be occupied by the stars of autumn. And I think there's only one real constellation of autumn, certainly the only one that springs to my mind, that's strikingly obvious, and that is the Great Square of Pegasus.
Oh, yes.
High up in the south at the time of our chart, although the stars aren't particularly bright, and indeed it's not particularly a square, the shape is very, very distinctive and easy to find. I remember when I first started out, I always used to think that square Pegasus was going to be smaller and brighter than it actually is. And it actually covers a large area of sky. It's quite surprising when you see the square Pegasus for the first time, just how large it is.
It's like a void, isn't it, in the sky, really? But it's not empty. There are stars inside it, but they are quite faint. But of course, spreading out from the upper left corner of the square is a wedge-shaped group of stars which represents Andromeda, the chained princess. In fact, the star in the upper left corner, or the northeast corner of the Great Square of Pegasus, belongs to Andromeda. That's Alpheratz, the alpha star of Andromeda. And the famous galaxy, Messier 31, is Andromeda. So this is a good time of year to look out for this particular galaxy. But the vast area below these regions is a bit ill-defined, isn't it? It's the watery area.
It's very ill-defined. It's watery constellations that are very ill-defined. But nonetheless, they're there, and if you've got a darkish sky and a fairly flat horizon, you'll see them. If you just look below the lower edge of the Great Square, these are actually quite distinctive when the moon's out of the way. There's a small circle of stars known as the circlet, and this represents one of the fishes of Pisces, the fishes, the other being located at the end of a long cord of stars that runs beneath and up the left-hand side of the square. Quite why, I can't remember now why there are two. There's a rope attaching the two fish together. I don't know.
It's because it's the two gods were sitting on the bank of a river, and I think there was the monster. If I remember properly, it's Typhoon is the monster that came, and it startled them, and they tied themselves together with a rope and then changed their form into fishes and jumped in the river.
Okay.
That's what it's supposed to represent. Pretty obvious when you think about it.
I don't know why I didn't think of that. I really don't. But the chord...
I was going to say, they are pretty faint, but they're giving a boost at this time of year, or this particular year, I should say, because we've got the bright planet Jupiter in Pisces at the moment.
Yes, that's true. So it's worth looking. You're going to be looking at this area anyway if you're looking at Jupiter. The chord forms part of a sharp angle at its midpoint, and this angle points to another watery constellation, and it is Cetus the sea monster. This is quite a hard constellation to pick out because there's hardly anything in it, and it doesn't really have a distinctive shape, does it?
I don't have a problem with Cetus. It is a bit of an odd constellation, but it's sort of got like another pentagon pattern at the eastern or the left-hand end, and that's the bit with the bright star Menkar in it, which is orangey in colour. And Menkar is Alpha Ceti, which means, and the name means nostril. Which I don't know why I find that amusing, but I do. And at the other end, which is what you get to if you follow one side of the great square Pegasus down, I think it must be the eastern side, the left-hand side down, it points to Difta or Deneb Katos. It's got a couple of names. And that's the beta star of Cetus. So Cetus basically lies in between those two stars. Difta means, I think Difta means frog, doesn't it?
I can't remember what Difta means. I spend so little time in these constellations. But, well, to the left, though, below Cetus is a line of meandering stars. And I think this is slightly more interesting. This is Eridanus the river and is one of the longest constellations in the entire night sky. It disappears below the horizon, ending not too far from the southern celestial pole. So obviously we can't view the whole constellation from the UK.
No, it's Achernar. That's right. Right at the very bottom of it is Achernar, which is a lovely star, actually, very bright.
But we can't see that from the UK. But I do think that's a nice little line of stars to follow, and it's nice to see Eridanus.
And if you go up the other way, that will bring us to Orion. And I think we're going too far into winter if we go to Orion. So I think we'll bring everything to a close now. So thank you very much, Paul, for your knowledge and humour and pickiness as ever. So
delight to work with you, the professional, as always, Pete. See you next time.
All right, bye.
Bye.